for coming back. That's good. Huh? Okay, dear Ajahn Brahmali, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the advice from the Buddha that told the kingdom to not authorize what has not been authorized, not to take what has been authorized, not to take out what has been authorized. Essentially, it is freezing the laws. However, it becomes impractical to uphold in an ever-changing world. New laws have to be set up to regulate new technologies. All laws which are gender, racial, discriminative will have to be changed to equal our society. What is your take on that? Yes, that is a good point. It is a little bit strange that the sutta says that you should just uphold the old laws and not make any changes to it. And I think maybe what is meant there is that the basic principles that you adhere to in society should be the same, right? The basic things, the underlying principles like a sense of compassion and care and looking after each other. And I think these are probably maybe the things that are meant here. Obviously, you have to add new laws, but you try to keep those basic principles upon which society is built. You try to keep those the same. I think there are universal principles that are always applicable to people. Whatever society you live in, I think there are certain things that are always applicable. And I suspect that might be what is meant in this particular case. Otherwise, as you say, it becomes very impractical and very hard to kind of function in the long run in that particular society. That is the only thing I can think of. Otherwise, the passage does not make that much sense to me, and I would agree with that. Okay. Dear Ajahn, during meditation, my mind often slips into the past, thinking of whether I did enough for my late mother who passed away of a long-term illness. Is this considered dwelling in the sensual world? Okay, so not really so much in the sensual world. It's more like dwelling in a bit of guilt, feeling a bit guilty perhaps, or something like that. So you just have to remember that very often the idea of hindsight, when we look back and we think, did I do enough? That hindsight is usually not the truth. It's usually lying to you. Usually we did our best at the time, and then when we think back, we have a distorted perception of what actually happened at the time, and we think that we could do more than actually was possible. So really, you just have to let go of that and realize that your hindsight is not reliable, and you can never really redo that past anyway. The past is basically we are conditioned, and the way we are conditioned means that we do our best, regardless really of how it may look in hindsight. So just learn to forgive yourself. Ask yourself instead, what can I do now for my late mother, right? What can I do now given that she has passed away? And there are still things that we can do in the present moment, even when somebody has passed away. One of the things, remember that because parents and family members are very close to us, very often there may still be a connection there that we have to family members. So because the connection may still be there, you can still, whatever intentions you have now, may still affect your mother, your father, whoever it is. So if they are around, sometimes you can just do like a little act of forgiveness, right? Say to your mother, if you are around, mother, if you can still hear me, please, I ask you forgiveness for anything that I may have done that was unfortunate or wrong. And also please know that I grant you forgiveness for anything that you may have done towards me that was painful in any way. And this is actually a very nice way of alleviating some of the problems that may have arisen in the past. No relationships are ever perfect. There's always little deficiencies in relationships. And in this way we can kind of alleviate some of those problems. And then your mother can move forward in her life, and you can move forward in your meditation without thinking about these things. Also, One of the traditional Buddhist things, of course, to do when somebody has passed away is to do some acts of merit in that person's name. So please do that. Sometimes go to a temple somewhere, make a donation somewhere, do an act of charity, whatever it is. And when you do that, tell your mother, I'm doing this in your name. I'm doing this for you. Right? And say that with a sense of genuineness. Really do that for the person who's passed away. And if she is around, she will feel that. Right? This is kind of more like the mind-to-mind contact that you can have with people who passed away. So she will feel that. And she will feel very happy, right, that you're doing something positive for her. And that will lift her up. That will help her into the future. So that is a much better way. Try to find something you can do for the person who's passed away, and then realize that at the time I did my best, I was conditioned the way I was. Hindsight is stupid, it does not reflect reality. The reality is that you did what you could do at the time. And if anything, try to learn from it. So maybe you don't make the same mistake. If you feel you made a mistake, then see, what can I do different next time? Think like that instead. And then you're moving towards a more positive future rather than dwelling in the past, and forget about the past instead. So forgive yourself, right? You're already a very good person. You're already doing so much good. You have so many good intentions. If anyone who comes here to the BGF, anyone who comes to our Buddhist society in Perth, they are really good people, very noble, high, with beautiful intentions, trying to do the good things in the world. And what a wonderful thing that is. So give yourself a bit of a break. Don't be too fault-finding with yourself. We tend to be too fault-finding with ourselves in this world, thinking that we have much more power than we actually have. We don't have much power. We are conditioned to be the way we are. Okay. Okay, question A, is the Jatakas the word of the Buddha? And question B, how much of the life of the Buddha is true? Is it compiled somewhere from the suttas? Thank you, Bhante. Okay, is the Jataka the word of the Buddha? Well, the Jatakas, they are what you might call canonical Jatakas. They are Jatakas that you actually find in the suttas, right? When the Buddha talks about his past life and he tells the story of what he did in the past. And some of those canonical Jatakas, the ones you find in the Nikayas, might very well be true. It's quite possible that some of those, they might be slightly exaggerated, perhaps some of them, because they're not exactly the same across all traditions, some of those. But some of the Jatakas may be true. There's one of my favorite canonical Jatakas found in the Anguttara Nikaya. And this is a Jataka where the Buddha talks about the past life when he was a wheelwright or a cartwright. Somebody who makes wheels, I think it was, a wheelwright, I think it was. A wheel maker, right? For carts, for its ancient kind of carts that were drawn by horses and oxen or whatever it was. And that was a very humble profession in ancient India. Kind of the wheelwrights, the wheel makers were very low on the social hierarchy here. And here was the Buddha in the past life, before he was the Buddha, of course, and he was making these wheels. And the story is that the king comes to him and the king says, well, I need a new pair of wheels because I'm going into battle. Can you produce the wheels for me? And then the Buddha-to-be, the future Buddha, he takes... he has 6 months to make these 2 wheels, and then in 6 months, minus 6 days, he makes 1 wheel. And the king's come and said, the king is kind of despairing. You only made 1, there's only 6 days left, right? What is going on? And he says, don't worry, I will make the other one as well. And then he makes the other one in 6 days. And then the king asks him, what's the difference between those 2 wheels? One took 6 months minus 6 days. One took only 6 days to make it. What's the story? And then he shows him, and he takes the wheel, and he rolls the wheel out. And the wheel that took almost 6 months to make, he rolls it out, and when the momentum stops, it stands vertical like that, right? No movement. Whereas the other one, he rolls it out. It comes to the end, it falls over. So one is like a perfect wheel. It's a wheel that has taken out all the crookedness in the wood. Whereas the other one, because he only had 6 days, they didn't have time to take out all the crookedness in the wood. So it's not perfectly balanced, so it falls over. That's the story, right? But the nice thing about that story is that the Buddha-to-be is in this very humble job. Very kind of, there's nothing fancy about it. We're used to kind of thinking about the Buddha's past life. He was a king, or he was some kind of Brahmin, or something magnificent, right? That's kind of the usual kind of stories. But here, very, very humble, very ordinary here. And I think maybe if there is any original story about the Buddha's past life, that might be one of the most original ones, I think, precisely because it's so humble. Nobody would dare to make it up, right? Right? Oh, we got to lift the Buddha up. So because nobody would dare to make it up, perhaps it is true for that reason. That's kind of the way I think, right? It's a bit heretical. There's my brother Thor again, outside. So that is the one I take to be one of the most convincing ones. But then there are others in the suttas. There is, of course, the famous Gatikara Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 82, 81? 81 is it? 81, okay, maybe 81, you're probably right about that. Gatikara Sutta, where the Buddha to be is this Brahmin, young Brahmin, right, who's very proud, and he goes to meet, he has a friend who was called Gatikara, who was a very staunch supporter of the Buddha, and Gatikara says, come Brahmin, what's his name again? Jotipala is his name. Come Jotipala, let's go and meet the Buddha. And this Jotipala, who is the Buddha to be in the future, he says, who wants to see these shaven-headed ascetics, right? These menial, these swarthy offsprings of Brahma's feet. They had a really kind of derogatory way of talking about the ascetics. Offspring of the Brahma's feet means you're born from Brahma's feet. The feet is the dirtiest part of the body, right? So it's really bad to be born from the feet. So he really talks down the Buddha. And it's very interesting because it's very different from the Bodhisattva idea. The Bodhisattva idea is that, the Buddha to be, he has practiced through 4 incalculable eons to become perfect, right? Always practicing. And here he doesn't even want to see the Buddha. He has no idea what the Buddha is, no idea about the Dhamma, hasn't got a clue basically. It really goes against this whole idea of a bodhisattva ideal. And eventually this Gatikara, his friend, he grabs him by the hair. And grabbing a Brahmin by the hair is a very bad thing to do. It goes against all the social conventions, right, of India. It's really, really bad. And then Jotipala thinks, wow, he dares to grab me by the hair. Must be something really serious. Then he agrees, and he goes off to the Buddha, Buddha Kassapa, the previous Buddha, and they have a kind of a conversation. Wow, this is really good. And then he ordains. That's the kind of the story there. This is another one of the canonical Jatakas. Another one is the Mahasudassana Sutta. Digha Nikaya 17, which is kind of connected to the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. And there, the Buddha to be in a past life is this magnificent king with 84,000 palaces, right? And 84,000 of this, 84,000 of that. Everything is gold, everything is silver. He has thousands of wives, right? And all of this kind of stuff. And everything is just absolutely over the top. Each palace has 84,000 rooms and one kind of bed of gold, one of silver, right? And it's just really, really over the top. And this is kind of what I mean. When you read these stories, you think, yes, maybe not entirely sure about these stories. It's too much, right? It's just, it really boggles the mind. But still, it's a very nice story because the Mahasudassana Sutta, even though he is a king who has everything, it's impossible to imagine anyone having more than that in terms of material possessions. Not only does he have everything in terms of material possessions, he is the king, so he is the most powerful person in the country, and he is beloved by everyone. All his subjects in the country love him because he's like a father figure. He actually looks after everybody. He's a just king who rules in a just way, even though he's so wealthy. He hasn't got his wealth through corruption, right? He's got his wealth in a good way, which is always nice. So he has everything that everybody wants. He's loved by everybody. He has the highest position, both socially, in terms of power and everything. He has all the wealth. And what does he do at the end of his life? He gives it all up and goes forth. That is It shows you, it's a kind of a story that shows you, no matter how much you have of worldly fame, of worldly anything, it is not worth even anything compared to the real practice of samadhi and the real practice of the Brahma Viharas. So he goes forth, he practices samadhi, and he gains this lofty Brahma Viharas, right? And then he moves on into future life, gets reborn in the Brahma Loka as a consequence of that. So it's a beautiful story that shows you the limitations of worldly power, of worldly things. It's not really worth anything compared to the meditation. That's really the point of that. Right? But the thing is that even if you had 84,000 palaces and you had 84,000 wives or 84,000 husbands, right? Would you be satisfied? Probably not, right? 84,000, not enough. I need a bigger one. I need something more, right? The whole planet, maybe the whole galaxy. Only one galaxy, oh, not enough. Want more galaxies. And this is the problem, of course, with craving. There is no end to that. And that's why you have that beautiful verse in the Dhammapada which says that the contentment is the greatest wealth. Because when you're content for the first time in your life, you have enough. Having enough doesn't mean having a lot of stuff. Having enough means being content. Only then are you really happy here. So that is the that Jataka. Another Jataka in the Suttas is the Mahagovinda Sutta, also in the Digha Nikaya, where the Buddha-to-be is this great Brahmin. He is very powerful in this sutta as well, but he decides to go forth at the end, practicing the Brahma Viharas. There are a few other suttas where he is a great king, like the I think the Makadeva Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya 83 or something like that. Also, he is a great king in the past, and there are a few more like that, where the Buddha talks about his past lives. So these are the most likely ones, because they are in the suttas, likely to be the earliest Jatakas. My preferred one is where he is a wheelwright. I must sound terrible, right, to most people, always kind of bringing things down to the lowest level. I probably sound like I'm really kind of a nasty kind of monk, right, who does these kind of things. But I'm just trying to be realistic. That's really all I'm trying to do here. And then, of course, you get the whole Jataka literature, all the Jataka stories, which is part of the, this big sequence of books called the Jatakas. And that is much later. And when you read those, straight away, you know that you are in the later category of literature, because the stories are so different. They are structured in a different way. They don't really have any real Dhamma teachings anymore. And the whole kind of layout, the whole thing works. Is very different from the way it is in the suttas. You get this feeling that you have moved into a different type of text, basically. There's not much Dhamma in there at all. There's all this worldly phenomena. And some of the stuff is really weird. Like I'm sure most of you will know about the Vesantara Jataka, right? You know the famous Vesantara Jataka, where the Buddha gives away his wife and children and all of that, right? Is that a nice thing to do? It's kind of strange, right? You're giving away your wife. Is that really moral? And you get this feeling that you're almost moving into a different thing that has nothing to do with Buddhist morality or Buddhist way of living anymore. And the whole story is rather strange. And still, despite that, it is the kind of the story which the vast majority of Buddhists, if you grow up in a Buddhist country like Thailand or Sri Lanka or whatever, this is the kind of stuff you will hear. The plays are put on, playing, Prince Vesantara and all of these kind of things, and and everybody knows about these stories. That's what they think Buddhism is, but actually, it's probably not Buddhism at all. So that is the Jatakas, so how much of the life of the Buddha is true? Is it compiled somewhere from the suttas? Well, it depends what you mean by the life of the Buddha, right? Because there is some biographical details found in the suttas. So when you read the suttas, sometimes the Buddha will talk about his own life before he left the home life and all of these kind of things. And straight away you realize that there is some discrepancies between the way it is talked about in the suttas and the way the life of the Buddha is portrayed in later literature. Often there are some differences there. One of the typical things, just to give you an example, is that in in the traditional story of the Buddha, there is this idea that he left the palace in the middle of the night. He saw his wife and his son sleeping. He gets up on the horse Kantaka, and he rides on Kantaka, jumping over the city wall and kind of disappearing out of the city, right? This is the story. Is that true? From the suttas, it's completely wrong. It doesn't fit at all. According to the suttas, he left his home life and his parents were crying when he left, right? So how could his parents be crying if he left in the middle of the night? It's impossible. He obviously talked to his parents, he talked to his family, he said, I want to become an ascetic, I want to give up this life. Presumably, because he talked to his parents, he would have made sure that his wife and his child were looked after, right? It doesn't say that in the sutta, but it kind of makes sense that that is part of it, because he had talked to his family. So you can see those little snippets that you find in the suttas are quite different from what you find in the later biography of the Buddha, which you find in the commentaries and everywhere else. Another example is where the suttas talk about, where the Buddha talks about his life before he left the home life. Actually, I wonder if we're going to talk about that sutta. Let me check it out now, because it's quite a nice little sutta. And that story does reoccur a few places in the canon. Let's see if it is included in this in here. No, I don't think I have included it this time. Okay, that's fine. So I don't think it is actually part of this, which is okay. That means I can tell it without actually ruining the sutta later on. So. This sutta is the sutta where the Buddha talks about his life before going forth, and he says about that life before going forth that I was living in the highest kind of luxury, right? And the first kind of luxury was that there was 3 lotus ponds built just for me. In one lotus pond were red lotuses, in another one blue, and another one white. That was kind of the highest luxury. When you were a young man in India 2,500 years ago, the best you could get was 3 lotus ponds, right? That was kind of the Xbox of the day. That was the lotus ponds. That's where you played and you amused yourself and you had a good time, because I think life was a bit simpler in those days. And then they had 3 houses. In the translation, it often says 3 palaces. The word is pasada in Pali, and the word pasada, I researched that a little bit. It actually means, it seems, a stilt house. You know that the stilt houses, the houses on stilts, and then so that the water can flood underneath and that kind of thing. So he had 3 stilt houses, one for the winter, one for the summer, one for the rainy season. And then when in the rainy season, he always stayed in that stilt house. He never came down underneath it. Underneath, in other words, it had to be raised to be able to go underneath. And he amused himself there, and he had all these musicians, right, who were looking after him at that time. So that gives you some idea of what the Buddha's life was before he left the household life. It wasn't an enormous palace as it talks about later. There's nothing there about the Buddha's father being the king, right? Yes, he had luxury, but it was a fairly low-key kind of luxury. It was luxury for the time, but it was not magnificent in the way that it is made out to be later on. He talks about his clothes. His clothes were made of kasi cloth. I love that little detail. Kasi is just another word for Benares, Varanasi. Those of you who have been to India, you know about Varanasi. And if you go to India today, it is famous for its cloth, right? Nothing has changed in India for 2,500 years. It's almost the same, which is kind of neat, right? You go there, you can still recognize things. There's many things like that. You read the suttas and you go to India and say, jeepers, it's still the same. And you kind of, it's a bit of an eye-opener. So he had cloth from Benares, from Kasi, from Varanasi, because that was considered the best cloth in India at that time. That was the luxury brand. That was the kind of the, what is the, you know, the Hermes or whatever it is of those days, right? This was the Armani of 2,500 years ago, the Benares cloth. So he had that, and so he had a jacket, and interestingly, the clothes that he was wearing, the names of those clothes were pretty much the same names as the clothes that monks are using today. In those days, there wasn't a major difference between the way the lay people were dressed and the way the monastics were dressed. There was only a difference in style, but the clothes were exactly the same. If you look at you guys now and compare to me, it's quite different, right? But in those days, it was basically the same thing here. So this gives you some insight into the life of the Buddha. Luxury, but not immense luxury. One of the little things that it says in that sutta as well, it says that in my father's house, the workers and the slaves and the kind of the domestic people who worked in our house, they were given special food. They were given choice rice, they were given meat and these kind of things. Whereas in other houses, the slaves and the workers were given broken rice and sour gruel. So this is one of the nice little touches in the sutta. It shows that the Buddha's father's house was a house of compassion, where you looked after everybody, right? Even the ordinary people were given something proper to live on, given kind of luxury food, if you like. Meat would have been a luxury food in those days. Right, so here you can see, this gives you some outline of the life of the Buddha prior to his awakening. It gives you some idea what it was like. And actually, it is quite different from what you hear in the later tradition. So I think if you want to find out, read the suttas, and you find little bits and pieces like this, and you can put together something which is a reasonable idea of what the Buddha's life was like. Yes? Okay, so I hope that helps. So let us go on to the next question. Bhante, it is said Maitreya will come when the Dhamma has vanished. At the time Prince Siddhartha was born, had the Dhamma of the last Buddha before Gautama vanished? Was the previous Buddha the Dipankara Buddha, sadhu? Had the Dhamma vanished when the Buddha Gautama came? Yes, so it seems, right? When you read the suttas, there is no indication that there was any Dhamma in the world. However, there was spiritual people, there were ascetics who were practicing well. One of the first things the Buddha does after he goes forth is to seek out those teachers, right? So he goes to Alara, Kalama, and Udakara, Maputa, and he goes practicing under the most famous teachers of the day. And they obviously had samadhi. They obviously were very good ascetics, were practicing in a good way. So you could say some of the Dhamma was there up to a certain level, but not the real Dhamma of penetrating through to non-self and these kind of things. And I think some of these things may be like prerequisites that are required for the awakening of the Buddha. That needs to be a certain kind of society, right? Where ascetics are welcomed, where practice of meditation is done. And that is a kind of society where maybe a Buddha is likely to arise, because there are certain basics are in place already. The previous Buddha was not Dipankara, the previous Buddha was Kassapa before the Buddha, and that was the Buddha I was just talking about before in the Gatikara Sutta, where the Buddha to be, Buddha Gautama, he becomes a disciple of the previous Buddha in that particular sutta. Buddha Kassapa and the Buddha Gautama to be meeting together. Buddha Dipankara is just a mythological, a legendary figure, and he is supposed to be the Buddha under whom the Gautama of the future, takes a vow and says that I will become the Buddha in the future. I vow to you, I will practice for all I have to do, all the things I have to do to become a Buddha in the future. It's just mythology. It's not history at all. It's not something that you really need to take seriously as far as the Dhamma is concerned. Okay. Dear Ajahn, the subject of metta, you mentioned that most important is what works for us. How could one know that it works? Can you elaborate on the mind state during metta meditation? Thank you, sadhu times 3. Okay, so Works means that you actually feel something, right? This is what the working of metta is all about. You should be able to, if you really wish other people well, you start to feel really good inside. Some very positive mental state is happening. Metta is not only beneficial for other people, incredibly beneficial for you. It's supposed to feel really good. And that's how you know that it is working. Sometimes it is actually quite difficult to make it work. Many people find it quite hard. You sit there saying, may all beings be happy, may all beings be happy. Oh, may all beings be happy, right? Something like that. It doesn't really do very much to you. So it is important that we check inside of us whether it really has an effect or not. You should start to feel something, and that is how you know if it works or not. Sometimes you can try all kinds of methods, nothing really works. And sometimes remember that metta, we'll talk more about this later on, but metta starts with how we treat people around us in body and speech. That's really where it begins. So we have to treat people with kindness. And the more you treat people with kindness through bodily action, through speech in the day, you are conditioning your mind to think in terms of kindness and feel in terms of kindness. And as you do that, eventually there comes a point when you can sit down and you can do the metta meditation and you can start to feel very positive about the people around you. You really wish other people well, right? You just visualize the northern direction from here. Don't know where it is, doesn't matter. Wherever it is, just visualize a certain direction and you say, may all those wonderful people out there, may they be happy. There's a lot of good people in the world, right? Often people you have never seen or met, people who just go about their daily work, and you wish all those wonderful people out there, may you be well and happy. You build up this beautiful perception in your mind. It doesn't have to be towards anyone specific. It really is up to you to try it out, try different methods. Maybe we can try a bit of metta meditation later on to see if we can make it work. It's a bit difficult when we have so many suttas, because usually after all these suttas you just feel really tired at the end of the day, right? But we can try, maybe in the morning, because I have a bit more energy in the morning perhaps. Let's see what happens. Okay, so I hope that helps, and I will again get back to this later on a bit more about metta. I think it is a very important thing. It is an important thing to get it right, so that we actually are not just sitting there and kind of saying stuff that has no effect. That doesn't really make much difference. Okay. Bhante, it is often mentioned in the suttas that you shall arouse your energy to attain the yet unattained in situations when you are sick or tired. May I know, how should one arouse your energy? Okay, when you are sick or tired, I think it says in the suttas that what you should not do is kind of complain overly. If you have a tiny little bit of sickness, you think, oh yeah, I need to relax now, right? I got a bit of a cold, or you sneeze once, or sneezing, okay, no good, I can't practice now. You know, some tiny sickness, minor thing, and then you cannot take that too seriously. We need to be careful not to make excuses. That's really the idea. So even if you are a bit tired, even if you have some minor illness, that is no reason not to practice the Dhamma. That's really what it says. So, arousing your energy, right? What it means is that you think in the right way about the Dhamma. You remind yourself what is important in the world, what really needs to be done. So in lay life, the most important thing to do is to have enough mindfulness to live a life of kindness and compassion and care and generosity. And if you can live that kind of life, this is the most important thing in monastic life too, by the way. This is what really matters. If you do that consistently, you will purify yourself. And when you purify yourself, your meditation is bound to come together eventually. So this is the most important thing. Arouse your energy energy. Remind yourself in the morning, right? Okay, now today I'm really going to try my very best to be kind and caring as much as I possibly can, even if I meet difficult people. You're bound to meet difficult people, right? Almost every day we encounter little difficulties, little unpleasantnesses. We can't allow those things to lead us astray. If we do that, we're never going to make any progress. So this is the kind of energy you should arouse, this energy to do what is right and to live well. If you do that, then you're on the right track. That is by far the most important things. And then when you come on a meditation retreat, then of course you need to arouse the energy to sit down, to meditate, to do walking meditation, and these kind of things. A lot of the arousal of the energy comes almost automatically because you remember the Dhamma, you hear a nice talk, you feel inspired, and then you tend to do it. And if it doesn't happen automatically, you have to kind of encourage yourself a little bit to move in the right direction. Remember, every time you do a small act which isn't right, you are dragging yourself down, right? It's kind of scary. You don't want to drag yourself down. You don't want to make your life more miserable than it is. Enough problems already, right? Is there anyone here who hasn't got enough problems? Anyone who wants more problems? Oh, thank you very much. I don't want more. Nobody wants more problems in their life. So don't create problems for yourself. Be your own friend. Don't be your own enemy here. This is really the bottom line. And when you are your own friend, it means acting with kindness, living morally, living well, having a good heart, thinking well about the people around you. And if you can't think well about them, at the very least, have compassion for those dodgy characters that are around and who do dodgy things. Okay. Bante, regarding number 4 of Anguttara 579, that's the one we did this morning. It reminds me of the Zen Buddhism, where the followers revere the patriarchs and the poems of the patriarchs. What is your opinion of such teachings and teacher? Yes, there is a lot of guru worship in Buddhism. Across the board, it happens not just in Zen Buddhism, it happens everywhere, it happens in Theravada Buddhism as well, where we kind of worship certain persons too much, and they become like the guru, and what they say becomes much more important than what the Buddha says. Right? I don't want to pick on anybody in particular, but I think one great weakness of Tibetan Buddhism is that in Tibetan Buddhism, the guru is on top. Right? The guru is the highest. Then you get the Buddha. Right? I mean, it's getting things completely the wrong way around. The guru is on top, and then the Buddha. That's what I'm told anyway. I hope I'm not kind of saying anything wrong here. And then the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha afterwards. And to me, that is quite a serious corruption of the Buddhist teachings when you do that. And it goes really against how Buddhism is explained in the early suttas. So it is okay to revere the patriarchs if they are good people, if they are good monks, then of course it is fine. If they have something inspiring to say, it is good to revere that. But remember the hierarchy. The Buddha is number 1. Patriarch, don't know much about these patriarchs, but they are below, come after the Buddha. If they are good monks, and they have lived well, they are worthy of respect because of that. But they're not worthy of respect just because they are patriarchs. The whole word patriarch, straight away, it makes me feel a bit dodgy, because it sounds like somebody who's on top of a big pyramid, right? The patriarch, everybody else kind of beneath. It sounds like a power structure rather than a real Dhamma structure. And that to me already rings a few alarm bells straight away. As for the poems of these patriarchs, again, look at those poems. If there is something nice there, something inspiring, something you can use in your practice, by all means, use it in your practice. But remember again the hierarchy. Dhamma of the Buddha comes first. The poems of the patriarchs come a long way, quite a long way down, or at least below the word of the Buddha. But as always, we don't need to throw everything out. We don't need to be critical of everybody in this way. Take on board what works and what is useful for you, to that extent at least. Okay. Bante, could you share with us, based on the suttas, how can rebirth take place when there is no self? As there is no self, how then does one's previous wholesome and unwholesome karma follows the future rebirth? Is there a continuity? Thank you. Yes, there is a continuity. Okay, now I'll I'll answer in a little bit more detail than that. One of the things to remember about this is that there is no self in this life, right? In this life there is no self. And yet, despite the fact that there is no self, when I say no self, I mean no permanent essence inside of you, which is unchanging. That is the idea of a self. It's a bit unclear, non-self, right? What does it really mean? But anyway, that's really what it is referring to. And that doesn't exist in this life. So how does karma ripen in this life? And the way it works is that whenever you think about something you did bad in the past, you feel bad about it. That's karma ripening right away in this life. You do something nice, do something good, you feel good about that. That is the good karma ripening in this very life. The more good things you do, you accumulate all those good things, you start to feel good about yourself. That's karma accumulating and making you feel good about yourself in this life. That's how simple it is, right? That is how it's very, very simple. When you die, all that accumulation of good karma makes you feel good when you pass away, because you feel good when you pass away. It's like your mind is light and you are attracted to a state of mind that is similar to where you are. And that's why you go to a good rebirth. You go to that plane because your mind already has the same qualities as that particular plane of rebirth, because it has the same qualities. Like being attracted to like, bang, you get reborn there, you go there straight away. You make your mind heavy and dark and you fill it up with negative things. When you die, you're going to blame yourself. You're going to say, I was a bad boy, I was a bad girl, I did all these bad things. I deserve to go to this bad destination. You judge yourself. You are your own tormentor, sending yourself off into a bad destination because you feel, I deserve to go to a bad destination. You are the judge. You are everything in these particular things. So that is how it works, right? Just as the mind has a continuity in this life, in exactly the same way, the mind has a continuity from this life into the future life. There is no difference there. You're carrying with you all of these things. Why? How is there a continuity in this life? And it's really just like memories, right? Things that you have laid down in your mind. And when you associate somehow with those memories, the memories come back up again because of associations, because of the way that memory actually works in your life. In exactly the same way, associations in future life may bring up feelings. You can't even remember what was going on, but some certain feelings from the past may be brought up because of those associations. Exactly the same thing across lives as you find within this particular life right here. Both cases, no self, but in both cases you can access the past in this way. Okay. Okay, is there a conflict in the practice of a monastic who goes on teaching tours, e.g. leads pilgrimage to holy sites in Sri Lanka, etc., or to give talks worldwide, very frequently instead of observing the duty of solitude? It depends a little bit. I think that you have a point that if all you do is teaching tours all the time and traveling around a lot, then perhaps you are not observing enough the duty of solitude, right? And you're kind of trapped and become a teacher full-time rather than looking after your own practice. Of course, if you are an arahant already, then that might be fine. But if you're not an arahant, it's probably good to make sure that you also have that aspect of solitude where you look after your own practice. It's always a matter of balance, right? One of the things that you read in the suttas is the Buddha actually encouraging the monastics to teach, and even sometimes the lay people to teach, because when you teach, you learn a lot and you think about the teachings. And it actually can be, if you do it in the right way, it can be a support in your own practice. So this is the ideal way, where the teaching becomes a support in your practice, and you do the two things together. This is really the ideal way here. And I must admit, I sometimes like to teach a little bit, because when I teach, I have a chance to read the sutras on my own. Usually when I'm back in my room is just behind here, right? Sometimes I can hear you in here when I'm in my room. No, I don't mean that to make you feel kind of self-conscious or anything like that, but so I like to read the sutras a little bit before I come in here. And when I read the sutras, I think about them. And this is a great way of teaching to enhance your own understanding of these things, to allow these things in a little bit more deeply. This is one of the things I really like about teaching. Especially this retreat here, very intensive, 4 talks every day. Usually I only give 2 talks a day, plus Q&A in the evening. That gives you a little bit more time for reflection, which is nice, I feel. But regardless, it is a very beneficial thing to do, to be able to teach others. So thank you very much for allowing me to teach here. Mutual benefit, right? Which is great. So that is really the answer. It's all about balance, finding the right balance in these things. And sometimes I have to ask Ajahn Brahmali, am I teaching too much now? Because it is so easy to get so many invitations, right? You could teach all the time. So Ajahn Brahmali never says anything. He says, am I doing too much? He always says, up to you, whatever you want to do is, it's really up to you. And he doesn't really advise you, because he knows that you need to take responsibility for your own practice and look after yourself. And that is really great. Sometimes he gives you advice, but a lot of the time he just tells you to kind of look after things. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. If not, then please ask me again tomorrow or whenever. Last question for tonight. What are some easy inputs? You want the easy way again. Okay. So shortcuts, exactly, the easy ways we can put into our daily layperson's busy life to have more stillness, joy, and peace in our sitting or meditation practice. Okay, so the easy thing is, remember, the most difficult thing in the Dhamma is to remember the Dhamma in daily life. When you are very busy, when you have many things to do, a lot of people to meet, sometimes people who are not necessarily pleasant and all these kind of things, it is very easy to forget, right? When you are stressed, your mind is on 100 things, you're running around, so easy kind of for words to slip out of your mouth before you have a chance to really think about it. I'm sure you know exactly what I'm referring to. So, because of that, it is one of the most important things, as I was saying before, is precisely the idea of getting a regular input of inspiration of the Dhamma, so you always remember what you're supposed to do. So if you have a chance, listen to Dhamma talks, listen to these things to give you that uplift, that thing which kind of reminds you of what is important in life, right? And that brainwashing, keep doing that again and again and again. And as you do that, that will kind of be the thing that holds you up in the long run. And this is what you see in the sutta. This is how the Buddha explains this whole process of the practice. Always begins with the hearing of the Dhamma, hearing the teachings, to understand, but also to inspire. Inspiration often more important than understanding, because we know what we have to do, right? We have to be kind, okay, but being kind is hard sometimes, and for that we need inspiration rather than understanding. So this is number one. If you remember that one thing, that's really all you have to remember. One thing, to listen to Dhamma regularly, to read a bit of Dhamma, all these kind of things. That is by far the most important thing you can do to uphold your spiritual life in the long run. That is really all you have to remember. Apart from that, remember that the foundation for everything in Buddhism is sila, which basically means kindness. This is the foundation for everything else on the Buddhist path. So if there's one watchword you can keep in your mind all day long, it is the idea of kindness, right? Kindness, kindness, kindness. Kindness includes not saying or doing anything bad. Kindness includes actually doing good things, being kind, being generous. It also includes your mental state and your perceptions, being kind internally towards the people around you. All of that is included in kindness. So kindness has this beautiful, broad category that is always applicable in your life, whatever you do, whoever you are with. So these are some of the simple things. And when you do meditation practice in your daily life and you are sitting down and you want to be peaceful, then the most important thing in daily life, just do that to help you to be a better person, right? Because the hard thing again is to be kind all the time, so the meditation should support you in that kindness. It is more important to be kind, to live in a virtuous way, than it is to meditate. Meditate is secondary. Kindness is the foundation for everything else. If you find that meditation makes you more angry and negative, don't meditate. Right? Sometimes that can happen if sometimes we get down the wrong track and meditation doesn't really work and you feel really grumpy afterwards. If that's the case, don't meditate, right? Instead, just do something else instead. The point here is to be as balanced and as good-hearted as we possibly can. This is kind of the point with all of this. So use a meditation to support that kindness, and then you're using it in a good way in your ordinary life. A bit of just peace and calm by yourself, a bit of metta perhaps in your daily life. If you want to do metta practice, I would suggest to you to use some earphones, right, the iPod or whatever, listen to a nice guided metta meditation by somebody, I don't know, whoever your favorite metta teacher is, and then that will put you in the right mood, and it makes it easier to do the metta meditation. If you're all by yourself, it can be very difficult to get into the right mood sometimes, make it harder. Okay, that is some ideas for you. So that is all for tonight. And we will see you again tomorrow morning. Now, before we do that, let's pay homage to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, do the Arahang together here.